asking about agents, asking about, does my son need an agent? What about this? What about that? How do I get an agent? So I thought it might be good for us to maybe discuss a little bit about, the role of agents in sport and how you see it, and from working as in an agency and being around semi-professional, professional rugby your entire adult life.
Yeah.
Does every rugby player need an agent?
No. Let's very, very early. I need to separate. I'm strictly rugby league is a completely different kettle of fish. Contracts start getting given out from 15, and they're important. And it's a strange world. But there's if you look at the accredited, there's some data out there. If you look at the accredited union agents, there's 30. There's 200 in rugby league. So it's genuinely important for these kids from wherever they are to, if they need to get schooling included in their contract, they need to get healthcare included in their contract. They need the club will, if they don't have to, the club won't pay them. So some of those kids desperately need the right guidance at a very early age, which for me, first coming in, seemed not right. But it's very true. I've seen 15-year-old, 14-year-old kids on 5-year contract getting completely screwed because they didn't have the right advice. In rugby union, in Australia, you do not need an agent. You can almost do it yourself. If you are a good player at Australian schoolboys, someone will call you on the phone. It is a very small world. If you are playing second grade in Shoot Shield, you do not need an agent because you haven't reached first grade yet. I got an agent when I was probably 30, 35, 40 games into my first grade career. And I was probably 20. So that's when it became sort of more clear. It's a very strange dynamic of agents in Australia. There's probably realistically 3. So that's where the issues come in. I'm talking about guys who if you cross-sec all the Super Rugby players, Australian born, there's one guy who does all of Queensland, a guy who nibbles at Queensland, and then 2 guys who do New South Wales. It is a truly bizarre dynamic. So it's a necessary evil at some point because those guys are so well tied in with the franchises. But if you're a kid coming out of school, you don't, unless you're negotiating a 2-3 year deal, you do not need an agent. You don't need to sit on those books. And while we're on that, there's also then in my mind sits the next level of agents, one down, where they just sign you and move you, and they get paid per. So those guys get paid. If Chubby, I sign you from South, I sign you, you're now mine. At the end of the season, I will offer you to West, Eastwood, Norths, say, Chubby, this is a better opportunity for you. And when I put you there, I will get $1,000.
I call them bin chicken agents.
Well, those guys are very active. There's a few of them, but they're very active. They will hit up everyone from first grade to the end, bottom list of second grade, because there'll be value in there somewhere. So they'll move 40 players a year and make 40 grand. That's how they do it. Whereas the usual agents, just for clarification, will take Chubby, I get you a contract with the Waratahs, and I take 6.5% of your earnings. So they won't touch you at Shoot Shield level.
Okay. Just for full context, Tafu Pelota now didn't have an agent for the last 5 years of his career. And he's one of, at that point, he was on the back end, but he was still one of the premier hookers in world rugby. I couldn't agree more. I think agents can be very beneficial in finding opportunities, potentially, particularly if they're well connected overseas, and you're one of these high-level sort of Shoot Shield players who's just never quite cracked it in Australia, but would do well overseas. Finding those opportunities, I think the agents are very beneficial for. And some of them, once you've actually got a bit of a name and a reputation and you've actually done something, there are potential commercial opportunities that having a good agent can help you with. People who have played at our level are never going to need that. you know, and particularly if you're someone that's just starting out in Super Rugby, as you said, they will contact you directly. And why would you want to give 6.5% of what is a very little salary, or what is a low salary already to start with, to someone else who doesn't really do that much?
Yeah. So I signed with an agent, as I said, at that time. I got a call the next year from the Australian Academy. They're like, we want you to come in, we'll give you a contract. So, that contract might have been $15,000. They called me. My agent didn't call me. Then the NRC came up. The coach called me. He said, mate, I want you to be in my roster. I called my agent to tell him. These days, it's extremely common for a club to call the coach. I mean, like the TARS to call, the Todd Loudon and be like, mate, how's Chubby going? We like him. And then to connect you, and you're going for training. It's a very bizarre time. I still think it's a necessary evil, only because I've seen the insides of it, and I know that the ones who are connected are so well connected. But players have to understand that he's your manager. He's also managing 15 other guys in your shed. So at the end of the year, it's not so much about what's best for you as it is, how can I balance the interests of, I've got 15 guys here, I need to keep them all on contract somehow. And we've seen that so many times, and a lot of guys from my vintage are disenfranchised or they've moved agencies. This is talking domestically, because they got a hooker at the TARS, they also got a hooker in Melbourne. So they'll move the hooker to Melbourne, and then they'll move the TARS one back to and they'll switch them around to keep them both on contract. Importantly, like you said, you want to go to somewhere weird, you want to go to Spain, you want to go to Italy. If you're a very, very good player and you want to go to, England, Japan, you need a guy connected there. That's understood. If you're a club football player here and you haven't established yourself in first grade, you don't need an agent. You're more likely to get a little sniff from a franchise before you get that call from one of the agents, because as soon as they find out that someone's interested in you, they'll be interested in you. So it's a necessary evil here at the moment. It's incredibly incestuous. There's not many of them. But it's just amazing how many kids these days, I deal with the younger kids now as I try and recruit or this and that. And, they're decent schoolboy players without being outstanding. And they have an agent, and you facilitate it through that agent. So it's completely unnecessary until a certain point where you're genuinely a professional option.
I think you've said that fantastically. As you say, most things fantastically. A good way for me of deciphering who the good and who the maybe not so good is the people that do a lot of social media and who promote themselves a lot might not be the best. And if you have a look, there's agents I know that have signed third grade Colts players. Absolute insanity to me. But I think that'll help people, mate. That was really good.